What's up, everybody? Welcome into the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein. We've got a busy show for you coming off of 2 live weekends of the Scholastic period and the NBA draft. But before we get into all that, make sure you like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on the 24/7 Sports channel. All right. On this week's show, we've got a few different things to talk about. There's been a lot of recruiting intel on the road. As I said, the last 2 weekends were the Scholastic period, where kids played with their high school team. Coaches were out in full force now that the transfer portal is closed, and that has led to a lot of intel that our staff was able to dig up. Don't go far. We're going to get to that real soon. And then the NBA draft was last week, and it set a lot of examples about what we could look for next season. The 2025 NBA draft is going to be one of the most widely anticipated in a long time, so we're going to start talking about it right now. Don't go away. But first, let's welcome in Eric Bossi and Travis Branham to help bring us the latest in the recruiting trail. Fellas, thank you for joining me as always.
Great to be here.
Boss, I want to ask you this. We've had a bunch of commitments, 4 top 100 players come off the board in the last 24 or so hours, but we've also had someone jump into the class of 2024 potentially, and that's Jeremiah Fears, who decommitted from Illinois. You were ahead of this for those of us who follow you on social media. What can you tell us about this situation?
I think this is one that's been brewing for a little bit. Even all the way back when he first committed to Illinois, there was a lot of talk that Fears really wanted to end up in the class of 2024, that just high school basketball wasn't doing it for him. He wanted to get to college, get the ball in his hands, get a chance to go. 2024 with Illinois really didn't make a lot of sense. And then they get Will Riley, who's moving into the 2024 class. And maybe there's a little bit of, hey, why is Will getting to do this and I can't? But I think ultimately it's a pretty mutual split from everything I've heard on, and it's a very amicable one at that. This wouldn't be something that, let's say, Fears ends up somewhere else and ends in the portal someday. I wouldn't rule out Illinois as a return destination, but we're getting way down the road. But anyway, he's out. He's looking for a place to go in 2024. He's looking for a place to get the ball in his hands, be able to rock out a little bit. Anyone's seen Fears know that he's an offensively gifted guard, that he really likes to attack off the dribble, and he's a score-first kind of guy. Now, finding that situation is going to be a little bit harder. It's very late in the process. Not a lot of teams have, A, spots left, or B, the type of NIL money that he would probably want to look for. A name that immediately came to the forefront is Providence, which recruited him very hard the first time around. Now, they're interesting because technically they're all full on scholarships right now, but things can be done with that. Kentucky has been in touch. And then another name that's starting to pick up some steam is Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is interesting because they definitely have some roster space right now, and they could certainly use a scorer.
Jeremiah Fears is interesting to me, guys, because, and I said this about Will Riley, to me, he's someone who could really benefit from another year of high school for 2 main reasons. I think building his body up to the point where he's able to sustain the level of physicality he's going to see in college basketball, and also just with regard to some of the shooting percentages and learning how to share the ball with other good players. I think he's a better shooter than some of the numbers have shown in the last year, but the numbers are coming in correlation to the quality of shots he's getting. We can probably have differing opinions on that, but he's just someone that I almost feel like, not almost, I really do feel like NIL is pushing kids to college sooner than maybe they should be getting there, and it's having adverse effects sometimes. Trav, unless you have anything else to add on that one, I want to ask you about another guy, and that is Jasper Johnson, one of the most potent scoring guards in the national class of 2025.
Yeah, this recruitment is becoming a battle between North Carolina and Alabama. Kentucky remains involved. Obviously, he is from just 30 minutes down the street in Woodford County, where he was born and raised. And again, took an unofficial visit there recently, but also came off of an official visit to Alabama. And based on what I am hearing, it seems like Alabama could be the team to beat, but North Carolina is very, very deeply involved. It seems that there is a heavy mutual interest in the Jasper. Thinks very fondly of the Tar Heels, and this will be one battle that we will be monitoring in the weeks ahead.
Trev, let me ask you this, since we're talking reclassification. Jasper Johnson, someone that was widely kind of wondered aloud about if he would ever explore a move back to 2024. Are we expecting him to stay in 25 at this point?
Yeah, unless something were to come about and really surprise us, all signs are pointing to him staying in the class of 2025. And the biggest question mark around all of that, honestly, is where will he be playing high school basketball next year? There's been rumors that he could be ending up at Overtime Elite, which it's sounding to be the most likely case, but also not ruling out a return to his hometown team of Woodford County here in Kentucky.
All right. Very interesting. Boss, back to you. I want to ask you about what are currently the two highest rated guards in the rising senior class. That's Darius Acuff and Darren Peterson. And their recruitments are somewhat intertwined at this point. Is that right?
I think it's safe to say that they're a little bit intertwined, at least in regards to one school in particular. That would be Kansas, who is in deep with both of them. Just hosted Darren Peterson for official visit a little bit over a week ago. But I want to start with Acuff, since he appears to be the closest to making his decision right now. He's got a top four that also includes UConn and Michigan. But when we're talking about Acuff, it's really two schools. It's going to be Arkansas or Kansas. He's been to both. And there's been some speculation that maybe he could be deciding as early as the Peach Jam here in a week and a half or so. I don't know if it's still quite that sped up of a timeline, but I do think we could be looking at a decision from him pretty soon. Both schools have been very deep in this one. Depending on who you talk to, it's Kansas slightly ahead or Arkansas slightly ahead. I think that there's a fit for him at both schools with what he's done. So that one's coming down really, really close. I think for a while it looked like Kansas was kind of the team to beat. Arkansas has made up ground on this one, so it's going to be one to watch. Now, why it ties in with Darren Peterson is I just don't see those two playing together. So if Kansas were to get Acuff, they would certainly be super happy, but I think that would probably rule them out on the Darren Peterson. Now, when it comes to Peterson, he's another one who's talked about maybe taking some more visits to places like Kentucky, USC, Louisville, Washington, but he's already been to Kansas, and the one that he has set up next is Ohio State beginning August 1st. And I think with Peterson right now, at least as of things stand today, we're really looking at a battle between Kansas and that home state school. It is not without note that Peterson is currently under an Adidas NIL deal that I believe expires once he's done with high school. And that's something where if Adidas is working to re-up him and gets him done again, certainly that would bode quite well for Kansas. Now, if he gets off of the Adidas NIL, I think Ohio State and Jake Diebler are setting up to try and make a really big splash with him. So I would maybe lean towards Kansas a little bit on this one right now just because of how things stand. But really, Kansas and Ohio State are the two to watch, at least as things stand right now with Peterson.
I'm just glad we're in a day and age where we can say things out loud. You remember like 5 years ago, we used to be like, oh, there's some other variables. And everybody was like, yeah, we know who they play. You know, we know which grassroots company they're involved with. And now, you know, say what you will about NIL, but we can just say it out loud. So, all right, boss, thank you for that update. That is definitely some very interesting stuff on the two best guards in the rising senior class. Now I'm going to talk about a rising junior and a rising junior who is rising in a big, big way. CJ Ingram. For those of you who aren't privy to the text messages before this show, Bossi and Travis are battling to see who discovered this guy first. Equally enthusiastic. Trav, what do you like about this guy?
Yeah, former football player has recently decided to focus solely on basketball. And having watched him for the last several months, what's always stood out is, as you can see on the highlights, he's a freak athlete, has a great burst of speed, moves extremely well laterally, really strong, especially with the basketball, and has always excelled in an up and down game where he can get out in transition, finish above the rim, and speed up the offense with his defense. But recently, since he decided to focus on basketball, he's taking a skill level he's taking a skill set to another level. He's really polishing off his handle, developing a better feel for the game as he continues to get more reps and in-game live reps. And also the jump shot's really starting to come along. His numbers on the UIPL haven't been impressive to say the least, but as I watched him over the weekend down in Atlanta in the previous weekend with Bossi at Section 7, the shots are starting to fall, I would say, more consistently at this point. So when you're talking about a kid who played football, is now starting to focus in on basketball. He's only going to keep getting better as he keeps putting in more and more time in off the court to kind of get caught up to speed compared to other kids in his class.
All right, now spoiler alert here with Will Riley now officially joining 2024. That's going to create some openings here. CJ Ingram certainly going to be a candidate to move in. And again, we will have a rankings update coming to you after the summer live period, hopefully in August. Boss, want to ask you about one more guard, and that's another one who we were kind of on reclassification watch because he's older than most rising seniors, but that's Braden Brooks. What do we know about where his process stands right now?
Yeah, Brooks, I think he's pretty committed to staying in 2025 at this point, barring surprise. Now, you mentioned he is a little bit older. He'll turn 19 in the end of September, so that definitely puts him on the older side, but that's all right. This is a skilled, mature, confident guard, can play on the ball, off the ball. His recruitment's been pretty interesting. I think this time a year ago, we were really thinking Duke, Arizona, really the teams that were way up there. They're certainly still involved a little bit, but maybe fading some. Kansas is in there a little bit as well. But the two that I would watch as of today, I'm going to give you two to watch and then a sleeper, would be UCLA, local school, and then Houston. Houston has really gotten in there deep. They've put a lot of time and effort with him. And he physically, this is a guy who kind of fits the makeup of what both Mick Cronin and Kelvin Sampson look for in a guard. He can play two ways. He's physical. He can knock down shots. And now recently, Tennessee has jumped in. Don't know if they're quite in the level of a Houston or a UCLA with him just yet, but they've got some ties, some family ties with Brooks. And from what we heard early on, it sounds like their entrance in the recruitment has been very, very well received, and they're going to get every chance to play catch up with all the other schools that are involved.
All right. Very interesting. Another prospect, guys, that has been celebrated at the top of this class for a long time and whose process may be starting to wind down is Caleb Wilson, or at least we're getting a little more clarity. Trav, what's the latest on Caleb Wilson?
Yeah, top 5 recruit has been recruited or offered by many of the top programs across the country. And as you said, things are starting to fall more into place with this one. Kentucky, under John Calipari, was heavily involved. He had considered Kentucky as a dream school at one point, took a visit under that staff, and obviously they're now at Arkansas, and they have continued their pursuit of Caleb Wilson. So they are one of the teams at the top of this list. Two other teams that I'm still looking at here is Auburn and Tennessee. They're continuing their pursuits and potentially you look at a hometown option of Georgia Tech, born and raised in Atlanta. Damon Stoudemire prioritized him early upon getting hired. So as of today, you saw, again, schools like Duke, North Carolina, and some others offer. The new Kentucky staff did kind of test the waters there. But again, it seems like this thing is starting to kind of narrow in on a handful of schools with Arkansas, Tennessee, Auburn, and Georgia Tech.
And one school you did not mention there was Duke, which, like Brooks, was once considered pretty prominent in his recruitment. And we've seen the Blue Devils board seemingly evolve here in recent weeks and months. Fellas, thank you as always for the latest intel. For anybody looking for more on these prospects and obviously dozens and dozens of others, make sure to visit 247sports.com right now. On 247sports.com, there's a summer sale, 50% off annual subscriptions plus $1 for the first month. Take advantage of this deal by going to 247sports.com. Just be sure to get there before Tuesday, July 16th, before midnight. All right, and with that, we are going to bring in college basketball writer Isaac Trotter. Going to help me break down all things NBA draft. Trotter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, the 2024 draft ends, and now we're on to 2025. It's fun, right? Like not a bad draft to look forward to, right?
Yeah, because you know what? People cared more about the 25 draft on the night of the 24 draft. Let's just call it like it is. But here's the thing. I've had people ask me, like, everybody wants to talk about Cooper Flagg. Everybody wants to talk about Ace Bailey. But I've had people ask me in the last 6 days since the draft, like, who's next year's version of Donovan Clingan? Who's next year's version of Reed Shepherd? So you and I are going to break this down, taking some of the examples from this year's draft cycle and then trying to pick who those prospects might be in college basketball next year. And we're going to keep it primarily to college basketball. There is a a fairly sizable international contingent that will again be on the radar for NBA teams. But for the point of this discussion, we're going to keep it college basketball centric. So let's start with this. Who could be next year's Donovan Clingan or Zach Edey? And let me tell you what I mean by that. I thought one of the subplots of this year's draft was players who could have declared a year earlier, but went back to school, reinvested in themselves, and then benefited. We don't always see it work out, but it worked out this year. Clingan and Edey, both classic examples of that, being drafted in the lottery. Clingan may have been a first-round pick last year. I don't think Edey would have been. Both of those guys certainly helped themselves, and that's regardless of what they achieved during the college season. So who is that guy for you, Isaac, the one who went back to school and could help his stock the most in the coming year?
Yeah, I definitely thought that KJ Evans out of Oregon made a really, really strong decision to go back to school. He's super long and fluid, 6'9", 200 pounds, and was one of the better prospects in his class. And he didn't even, put his name in this draft. He immediately said he's coming back. And you just look at some of the stuff that he does defensively, and it just gets you excited. The court coverage, his ability to guard multiple positions, his anticipation of space is awesome. I was breaking down some film of his today. It's just like he had one possession where he guarded 3 different guys, helped on another one, shut off a point guard, then rotated back and stole it from the center. And that's the type of stuff that I thought that he did that was super, super sharp. And then there's other possessions too, where he's out there just breaking dudes down off the dribble, able to find guys for dunks as a playmaker. So I just feel like the league is shifting where you really want those pass, dribble, and shoot forwards. And he hasn't quite got there yet. The jumper still needs to take some strides. But I think going back to school and getting another full year of development is going to be huge for him. I think he's going to be one of the best players in the Big Ten. Remember, Oregon's in the Big Ten this year, which is a little bit weird for everybody, but he is going to be an all Big Ten defensive type of guy. And I think that it's a chance for him to potentially even be a lottery pick. And I thought I felt pretty good about that take. I'm like, oh, this one's different. Like not many had it. And then I fired up a 2025 way too early draft from Adam and Trav. And where do they have Kwame Evans, KJ Evans? Number 11. So I guess I'm not alone on that take.
No, I like it. And here's what I'll tell you, though. KJ Evans at one point was the number 1 ranked sophomore in high school basketball for a lot of the same reasons you just said. Like, you don't find very many guys who are 6'10" and move as effortlessly as he does. I think he's got real shooting potential. I think he's got real passing potential. I also think he's ambidextrous, to be honest. That's something to really keep an eye on. So I'm not sure he's an alpha. I'm not sure he's ever going to go get 20 at Oregon, but I think he's going to be really intriguing for NBA teams nonetheless, because he doesn't have to be an alpha in the league. All right, here's my answer to this question. The question again being, who could help themselves the most by going back to school? I like Hunter Salis at Wake Forest. This is another guy who was really highly thought of in high school. Career did not get off to the start that many of us expected at Gonzaga. Transfers to Wake Forest and just completely rehabilitates his stock. Had a chance, a very real chance, to not only be drafted this year, but be drafted in the first round. Instead, he's going back to Wake Forest. And if he can take another jump like he did this year, this is someone who has a chance to play his way into the first round, and not just likely first round pick, but get that guarantee that can usually be the decision maker for a lot of these prospects who are on the fence. So Hunter Salis, to me, someone who's going to have a lot of NBA eyeballs from day one next year. All right. Second question. Who could be next year's Kel'el Ware? And here's what I mean by this. And I'm actually, Trotter, if you don't mind, I'm going to answer this first because I think I have just the obvious answer to this. And in full disclosure, when I texted you and said, who's your example? I said, I'm taking Aaron Bradshaw. Because here's what I mean. We're talking about a highly celebrated high school prospect. It didn't click in year one. It didn't click for Kel'el Ware at Oregon. He transfers to Indiana, and it clicked in the second half of the season. I think Aaron Bradshaw could be that player next year at Ohio State. Obviously, his freshman season at Kentucky didn't go like we expected. But when we talk about sheer tools, like Kel'el Ware, Aaron Bradshaw has them all. He's a 7-footer with long arms, quick athleticism, soft hands, soft touch, shooting potential. He can change ends. He can move laterally. It's just a matter of making sure the motor, physicality, and everything in between lives up to his sheer physical tools. So under Jake Diebler and a fresh start and an opportunity for the first time in his career to not be paired with DJ Wagner and to go out and do his own thing. Not that Wagner was holding him back in any way, but just an opportunity to be his own player. I think Aaron Bradshaw is someone that could really follow that Kel'el Ware path. That's my take. I took the low-hanging fruit, and then I asked you to pick your guy. So who is your version of Kalel Ware?
This is a tough exercise because there are a few guys in the portal that I'm a little bit iffy on their fits, but I thought that Mark Mitchell made a really smart decision to leave Duke. And that's not easy to leave a brand like that, especially after you've started for 2 years. But with Cooper Flagg coming in, Kaman Maluak coming in, they just have a lot of guys in that front court. It didn't make sense for him to stick around. And him going to Missouri is really interesting to me because I think what Dennis Gates did in year one with Kobe Brown, like if I'm Mark Mitchell, I'm watching a lot of Kobe Brown tape, who turned out to be a first-round pick out of Mizzou, and going, hey, how do I best maximize myself like him? And so I think that Mark is going to be able to go to a place like Missouri. I think he's probably their number one, maybe him or Tony Perkins, 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it. And just be an aggressive, assertive version of yourself offensively. Just see something a little bit more from him as a big wing handler, putting guys in conflict, constantly putting pressure on the rim, and then obviously doing your thing defensively. And we always talk about like, oh, what do you need to do offensively? But I still think it's hard for guys to learn how to play at a high level offensively while also carrying a huge load defensively as well. And he just hasn't ever really gotten that real big burden to learn that. So I think this is a big year for him at Missouri to prove that he can be a two-way guy and prove he can be a top of the scouting report offensively guy, because as we've seen in the last draft, right? Like you need to be able to be one of those like 25 to 28% usage guys in college, because it's so much easier to scale down that role and become a role player again in the NBA. We saw that with Dylan Jones. We've seen that with Dalton Connect, like all of these guys proving that they can be those alphas of their respective teams. And Mark officially gets to do that now for Missouri.
What a quote Dylan Jones had. You know, being the guy taught me what I would need to be, help somebody else when they're the guy. It's a terrific quote in the OKC press conference. All right, third question from this year's draft examples. Who could be next year's Dalton Connect? And here's what we mean by that. Who is the mid-major transfer moving on up who could produce at the same level and play his way onto the NBA radar and maybe the first round as a result? Isaac, I will give you first crack at this one.
There's a lot of great names actually for this one. You could go Benham Rickhouse. I think you go Aaron Scott, who's transferring into St. John's, but I really like Chris Youngblood going from South Florida to Alabama. Like this one, I've been digging into a lot with his tape. He is phenomenal. He has a 3-year sample size of being a 40% three-point shooter, a high-volume three-point shooter, heading into an Alabama offense that wants to shoot a ton of threes. Like it's just a perfect fit. And so I think there's also underrated parts of his game. Like he had a 40% free throw rate last year. His ability to get to that mid-range jumper. I know Nate Oates doesn't want to take mid-range shots, but a mid-range jumper is good for Chris Youngblood. His ability to shot fake, get into the middle of the paint, and get to his one dribble pull up. Like he shot over 50% on mid-range jumpers. Like Nate Oates will take that. He knows the math, and that knows that's a good shot. Might not be a great shot for everybody else. It's a good shot for Chris Youngblood. And so I don't know if he necessarily has that on-ball juice that Dalton Connect necessarily had or showcased at Tennessee. And I don't think they're going to necessarily have that same roles. But as we've seen, the game is changing where you got to be able to shoot and you have to be able to process at a high level. And I think Youngblood does a lot of those two things well. And what an evaluation, too, going from Kennesaw State to now to South Florida and now to Alabama, too. Like there's some real staying power with his ability to constantly level up and continue to be an efficient, elite offensive player. So they're different than Connect, but I think he has a chance to have a huge year for Alabama.
I like everything you said there, and I'm going to be shocked if Nate Oates lets anybody take a mid-range pull-up, anybody at all. I mean, I don't know the math, but it would have to be, I think, higher than 50% for Nate to buy into that. All right, my guy next year's Dalton Connect is Tucker DeVries. Tucker DeVries, following his dad from Drake to West Virginia, I think, although the metrics don't necessarily say it, one of the truly elite shooters in all of college basketball. I think he's going to be able to do exactly what he did at Drake at West Virginia. He knows the coach. He knows the playbook. He's going to be comfortable in the system, and he's going to have a lot of stuff run for him. This is someone who in the NBA is going to play a smaller, scaled down role of what he's been asked to do in college because he's been a creator. He's had to take tough shots, tough twos. In the NBA, I think you're looking at like a Kyle Korver type prototype. Would not surprise me at all, especially if he's truly healthy, because I think he's been a little banged up in the last couple of years. If he's fully healthy this year at West Virginia, would not surprise me at all to see him be on NBA draft radars. We've listed him on the draftables in each of the last 2 years, and I have zero regrets about that. I think this guy is an NBA player if he can NBA level wings. All right, our last. Yeah, go ahead.
No, he's awesome. And I also think playing with Javon Small is really huge too. Getting him with a dynamic lead guard like that, I think can get him into more NBA concepts and stuff like that. So I'm super bullish. Like West Virginia, the Big 12's loaded, but West Virginia has a 1-2 tandem that they can play with anybody.
All right. I like it. I like it. Who could be next year's Reed Shepherd? Here's what we mean. The recruit who may not be super heralded, still ranked, still identified, but be even better than we expected and play his way into the one and done conversation unexpectedly.
I went with Trent Perry out of UCLA. It's kind of an interesting one there. Like Trent's an awesome player, right? Top 30 guy for us. But I just was kind of looking for ambiguous backcourts, and UCLA has that. I'm a big fan of Dylan Andrews. I think Kobe Johnson's going to be an awesome transfer for them out of USC. But Sebastian Mack, Sky Clark, Dominic Harris, there's a lot of names there. Like, I don't see why Trent Perry can't be that guy that really rises up into being a featured piece for this UCLA team. And he shot over 40% from three, 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio last year, one of the best players out in Southern California. And then the ability, I think that the NBA is really, valuing shot makers and high level processors, and everything about Trent Perry it checks off those two boxes. So Reed Shepherd's story is awesome just because it's so unexpected and it's honestly so cool. Like, stuff like this doesn't happen. That's why it's a cool story. But I think if you're looking for somebody outside that 5-star range, like, I think Trent Perry has a path and the talent to be a really, really impactful freshman for UCLA.
And this one was tough for me because it was just a month ago I finalized these rankings with the rest of the group. And so it's basically like, hey, a month later, who do you have some buyer's remorse about? Or who could be even better if you're only taking into consideration like next season? For me, that guy could be Con Kneppel at Duke. When I look at the way this Duke roster is assembled, I think he's going to have an opportunity to put points on the board right away. As I've said, Cooper Flagg is going to be the most wide-known player in college basketball next season, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's not Duke's leading scorer. I think Caleb Foster has a really good chance to do that. I think Con Kneppel's got a chance to be one of the team's primary offensive dominoes, though. This guy was the leading scorer in the EYBL regular season. He didn't play in the Peach Jam, and then he wasn't selected for postseason All-American games like McDonald's. So NBA scouts and kind of the recruiting fans who just pick up at that point in the season trying to get like a late info session on who's coming into college basketball, they don't know this name yet. So Con Kneppel, I think, is going to surprise some people. I think he's going to be ready to score. I think he's going to be asked to score from day one. And that's a huge part of this, right? Like having a role from day one, or in Reed's case, just demanding a role from day one and continuing to grow it throughout the course of the season. But Con's got my vote for someone who may be better more quickly than anyone anticipated. All right, everybody, for much more on this, and you can find Isaac and I on the 24/7 Sports channel. You can subscribe, like the channel you're watching right now for all the latest wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal intel. Keep it locked right here, the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. All right, now, everybody, this is our last section of the show, and what we're going to do is we're going to tell you what's on the horizon. Now, we've gone through the college season, to the transfer portal, to NBA draft season. Right now, 4th of July is coming up. You think there's a vacation on the horizon? You are wrong, my friend. What is on the horizon is the July recruiting period. And with the transfer portal now closed and probably 98% of college rosters finalized for next season, college coaches are finally able to focus on the rising senior high school class. And that means that over the course of the next 3 weeks, players, coaches are going to be on the road across the country. But you know who else is going to be on the road? NBA scouts are going to be on the road. Last week, we talked about who in the next year's 2025 NBA draft scouts are already looking at. But the reality is scouts are allowed to watch more high school basketball than ever now. They're allowed to go to the Peach Jam. They're allowed to go to the Adidas 3SSB and some of the other summer events. So even though it's 2 years down the road for a lot of these guys, and you very rarely see GMs or the primary decision makers, there's already some names that scouts are investigating. And let's be clear, no final decisions are being made. They're not being asked to publish any rankings or ratings. They're just starting their book. They're starting to keep notes and to track certain prospects. But the prospects that we know scouts are already intrigued with, well, it's some of the top names that you've seen in the 2025-26 rankings. Tops among them, AJ Debonsa. We talked about him a couple weeks ago when he retained his spot as the #1 ranked player in the rising senior class. This is a jumbo wing, loaded with skills, starting to make more dynamic athletic plays. And when it comes to sheer upside, AJ DeBonsa is someone that already has scouts' attention. Remember, he led the Peach Jam in scoring for a long stretch last season when scouts were allowed to be in the building. So his talent is nothing new for them. All right, now when AJ reclassified, when he went from 2026 to 2025, that created a space for a new number one. And we've seen that number one go back and forth throughout the course of the last season. Tyron Stokes had it initially, then it went to Brandon McCoy. Most recently, Tyron Stokes has retaken the spot as the top-ranked rising junior in the country. And now you may ask, hey, is this too early for NBA scouts to start paying attention? Again, the answer is no. It's too early for them to start forming conclusions, but they are tracking him. They are monitoring him. This is a name that is already on the radar. And again, it's far from a guarantee. In fact, if anything, just means he's even under more of a microscope. But Tyron Stokes, given the gains he's made in the last season, has really impressed people, and that's why he retook that number one ranking. He's powerful, he's athletic, and we've seen a vast uptick in the skill set within the last year. So he is someone that NBA scouts will be monitoring firsthand, in person, I should say, at the Nike Peach Jam beginning at the end of next week. Another guy, back to the class of 2025, one of the best players in all of high school basketball. You've heard me say he's the most reliable guy in high school basketball. That's Cameron Boozer. Cameron Boozer is one of two twin sons of Carlos Boozer. And to be honest with you, his game, while it's more versatile than Dad's, I think there's a lot of similarities. He's got great hands. He's a big-time passer. He can throw outlets. He can lead the break. There's really no glaring weaknesses in his game. In fact, I think he is the most well-rounded and reliable player in high school basketball. You've heard me say that before. I think scouts are watching just to see the evolution of his game. I think right now they feel very good about just how mature and versatile this player is. Whether or not he develops any star potential remains to be seen. Scouts will monitor that for the better part of the next 2 years, but this is someone who is already on the NBA radar. Another name that scouts are tracking is Brandon McCoy. We mentioned him earlier. McCoy was someone who briefly held the number one ranking in the class of 2026. He currently sits at number 2. And I should mention that every single player we've talked about so far, AJ DeBonsa, Tyron Stokes, Cam Boozer, and Brandon McCoy, is currently in Turkey participating with the USA Basketball 17 and under team trying to win gold at the World Cup. Brandon McCoy is someone that has made nice strides in last year. He's a big guard. He's really filled out, become more of a power guard. He's an elite defensive player. For someone who's this young and already this celebrated, he does not have any BS to his game whatsoever. This guy gets after it. He guards. He competes. There is no entitlement. Scouts absolutely love that. The last prospect I'm going to mention, another rising senior, and we talked about him earlier on this show. That's Darren Peterson. Bossi gave you the recruiting update of what he may be thinking, but this is one of the most prolific scoring guards in all of high school basketball. He has a level of polish to him that I don't know any other guard in the country possesses, because he can effortlessly get his shot at a multitude of different ranges. He clearly has hopes of being a one-and-done prospect, and that means it's incumbent on NBA teams to start to do their due diligence. Again, I will continue to emphasize this. Just because NBA scouts are in the building, and they're in the building now more than ever, it does not mean that anything is a guarantee for any of these players. If history has taught us anything, it's no matter how hyped up you are in high school, you still have to earn your way to the NBA. And once you're there, you have to earn your way to your second contract. It is a constant process of not letting entitlement get to you. But those are some of the early prospects that NBA scouts are going to be watching this month. We will have much more on the coming live period and next week's show. But until then, make sure you enjoy the 4th of July, and we'll see you real soon. Don't forget, 247sports.com, 50% off that annual membership, or $1 for your first month. It ends Tuesday, July 16th at 11:59. Don't miss out. We'll see you next week.